We've getting major damage. I'm in close to it. I've never seen anything like this in my life. Ever. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
That was the last time we looked the monster in the eye. On that afternoon, Oklahoma witnessed wind speeds of 210 miles per hour. In just minutes, 24 people lost their lives, and over 1,100 homes were wiped off the map. That's the level of destruction an EF5 tornado brings. And then, silence. For 12 years, the EF5 rating disappeared. Through all the outbreaks and all the warnings, we somehow avoided the absolute worst-case scenario. The drought went on for so long that people started to wonder if we'd ever see a storm that powerful again. We thought maybe, just maybe, we were safe. But on a dark night in North Dakota, everything changed.
Oh yeah, big tornado.
Big tornado. Oh, big wedge.
The tornado that struck Enderlin leveled buildings, but it just wasn't done. It did something that wind engineers thought was impossible. It grabbed a 250,000-pound industrial rail car and threw it into the sky. Just imagine the level of catastrophe this tornado brought. For 12 years, the monster was sleeping. In Enderlin, it woke up yet again. To understand why Enderlin is historical, you have to understand the scale itself. The enhanced Fujita scale is a measure of failure. An EF0 pulls off shingles. An EF3 collapses walls. But an EF5? That is the nuclear option. An EF5 requires estimated wind speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. For a tornado to earn this rating, the damage has to be absolute. A well-built house can't just be knocked down, it has to be swept clean, leaving nothing but a bare concrete slab. The debris must be granulated, turned into confetti. This is why the drought lasted 12 years. We saw violent storms in places like Mayfield and Rolling Fork, but in the eyes of the National Weather Service, they lacked that final 1% of total destruction. The EF5 became a meteorological ghost, a threshold so high that many wondered if it was impossible to reach in the modern era. Until the atmosphere over North Dakota decided to show us what 260 miles per hour actually looks like. But you know a tornado is EF5 when it can launch 250,000-pound trains and launch them in the blue sky. That's how Enderlin, a true EF5, changed everything. It began as a conspiracy of air. To get a storm of this magnitude, bad weather doesn't suffice. You need a perfect, terrible alignment of physics. It's almost as if nature really intended destruction. On the morning of October 31st, the atmosphere over North Dakota began to load the weapon. At the surface, warm, moist winds were racing north from the Gulf of Mexico, fueling the air with instability. But 18,000 feet above them, the jet stream was screaming in from the west at over 100 knots. This difference in wind speed and direction created extreme shear. Essentially, the atmosphere was trying to twist the air before the clouds even formed. The Storm Prediction Center saw the trap closing. At 8 a.m., they issued a high-risk outlook, a classification reserved for days when catastrophic life loss is expected. But the most dangerous ingredient was the cap. A layer of warm air sat on top of the atmosphere, acting like a lid on a pressure cooker. It prevented smaller storms from forming early in the day, which allowed the heat and energy below to build and build and build. The atmosphere was cooking itself. By late afternoon, the parameters were off the charts. The particularly dangerous situation tornado watch went out across the radios. The wording was blunt. Destructive tornadoes, widespread wind damage, hail the size of softballs. Meteorologists knew what was coming. The cap was going to break, and when it did, it was going to detonate. And that's exactly what happened. It started around 7:40 p.m., just as the sun was going down. The storm finally tightened up and dropped its first tornado near Spiritwood. At first, it looked like a drill bit digging into the ground, and within minutes, it widened out, tearing through the open fields. For the chasers on the highway, it was incredible to watch, until it came across a farmhouse. And the most important part of this interaction was the fact that the tornado wasn't even in full contact with the farmhouse. It almost grazed it, however. At these speeds, a graze is enough to destroy you. There were heavy trucks and SUVs parked in the driveway. Now, usually, a tornado might roll a car into a ditch or smash it into a tree. This was different. The wind didn't push the cars, it sucked them up. When they went looking for the vehicles the next morning, they didn't find them. At least, not the cars. They found pieces. Frames stripped of their body panels, tires gone, glass turned to dust, buried in the mud hundreds of feet away. It looked like they'd been put through a giant shredder. Because of that damage, the National Weather Service rated this tornado a high-end EF5. And that's the scary part. An EF5 has winds of 160 miles per hour. That's a major disaster. In any other story, that would be the main event. That would be the peak of the violence. But that night, the EF5 was just the warm-up. As the Spiritwood tornado fell apart and disappeared into the rain, everyone thought it was over. But the radar showed the truth. The storm wasn't dying. It was just reloading. The Spiritwood EF5 eventually roped out and vanished, but the supercell didn't weaken. It just changed modes. As the sun set, the storm became high precipitation. Heavy rain wrapped around the updraft, effectively blinding anyone trying to track the storm visually. In this chaotic, messy phase between Spiritwood and Enderlin, the storm produced two more tornadoes. The first was a brief touchdown near a rural junction. Because of the rain, it was nearly invisible. It struck a line of utility poles and damaged some farm outbuildings before lifting. Surveyors later rated this an EF1. Minutes later, a second funnel dropped. This one stayed mostly over open marshland, tearing up trees and scouring patches of ground. It was rated an EF0. While these two tornadoes didn't cause catastrophic damage, they were dangerous for a different reason. Nobody could see them. The rain curtain hid the violence, making it difficult for spotters to confirm what was happening on the ground. But these were just the disorganized attempts of a storm trying to rebuild itself. At 10:45 p.m., the cycling process finished. The rain cleared out of the notch, and the supercell prepared for the final showdown. If you want to find out what kinds of tornadoes exist, including the invisible ones, make sure to check out our video explaining them. Now, let's take our focus to the most important occurrence of that night. By 10:45 p.m., the messy rain-wrapped phase was over. The radar presentation cleared up, and the velocity signature, which is the measurement of wind speed, spiked hard. Just outside the town of Enderlin, the storm dropped its final tornado. This wasn't a small cone like the earlier ones. It was a wedge, a massive block of wind over a mile wide, moving through the darkness. It didn't look like a typical tornado. Since it was night, it was almost impossible to see until lightning flashed behind it. Then you saw it. The tornado descended upon everything like a wall. A mile-wide, blocky wedge of turbulent black cloud grinding across the horizon. It took up the entire sky. It tore through a patch of forest, snapping trees at the base before crossing Highway 46. It leveled two homes, sweeping the foundations clean. The first home to the west had a basement. The family inside managed to get underground just seconds before the house was ripped from above them. They survived, emerging to find the world above them gone. The second home to the east belonged to an elderly couple, Michael and Catherine Den. They were directly in the center of the vortex. The structure was subjected to the most extreme winds of the entire night. The house was swept completely clean off the foundation, leaving nothing but a bare concrete slab and scattered debris fields. Michael and Catherine were killed instantly. Just moments later, the tornado struck a third property further down the road, destroying it completely and claiming the life of 89-year-old Marsario Lucio. These were family homes that were simply erased from the earth. And it was this level of ground-scouring violence that hinted at what was about to happen next at the rail yard. The defining moment of this storm, the moment that ended the 12-year drought, happened at the railroad tracks. Sitting on the line was a string of heavy industrial rail cars. One of them was a fully loaded tanker car, weighing roughly 30,000 pounds empty, but potentially much more depending on the load. Usually, a strong tornado will tip a train car over. An intense tornado might roll it into a ditch. The Enderlin tornado picked it up. That is the level of destruction this tornado was capable of carrying out. When investigators arrived, they found the tanker car 480 feet away from the tracks. It hadn't rolled there. The ground between the tracks and the car was undisturbed. That meant the tornado had lofted this massive piece of steel into the air and thrown it like a baseball. Wind engineers ran the math. To lift an object that heavy and throw it that far, you need wind speeds of at least 266 miles per hour. That number is terrifying. It placed the Enderlin tornado firmly into the EF5 category. It was the first time in over a decade that the atmosphere had produced verifiable, undeniable proof of winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. When the sun came up the next morning, the damage looked catastrophic. Houses were gone. A train was hundreds of feet from the tracks. To anyone with eyes, it looked like an EF5. But science moves more slowly than the wind. For weeks, the Enderlin tornado was officially rated an EF3. The National Weather Service was cautious. They needed to be absolutely certain that the destruction wasn't just the result of poor construction or unlucky angles. They needed to verify the weight of the railcar, the trajectory of the throw, and the structural integrity of the homes. This sparked a massive debate online. The EF5 drought had made people cynical. They argued that if this storm, one that threw a train like a toy, wasn't an EF5, then the scale was broken. For over 3 months, the Enderlin tornado sat in the record books as a high-end major tornado, but not a legend. They gave it a rating of EF3 in the beginning, just because it didn't cause terrible damage. Essentially, they also factor in the destruction caused by a tornado for the rating, just to find enough reason to believe a higher rating is needed. After much debate, they factored in the math needed to pick up the heavy train from the tracks. Then, on October 6th, 108 days after the storm, the final report was released. The engineering analysis was conclusive. The math proved that no wind speed under 260 miles per hour could have launched that tanker car. The rating was upgraded. The drought was officially over. The Enderlin tornado became the latest EF5 tornado after the 2013 Moore tornado. And the logic makes sense. The Moore tornado did a lot more damage than the Enderlin tornado. There wasn't enough reason to believe its scale, except the trains. On May 20th, 2013, a monster wedge tore through the suburbs of Oklahoma City. It was 1.3 miles wide. It leveled 2 elementary schools, killed 24 people, and caused $2 billion in damage. It was the gold standard of atmospheric violence, undeniable, total destruction. For a decade, every major storm was compared to Moore, and every storm fell short. Mayfield was too messy. Rolling Fork was too rural. The Moore standard became an almost impossible bar to clear. Enderlin didn't have the same death toll or the same price tag as Moore. It didn't hit a school or a hospital. But in terms of raw power, pure, unadulterated wind speed, it finally looked the ghost in the eye and matched it. The EF5 rating is an exclusive club that no city wants to join. Since official records began, less than 0.1% of all tornadoes reach this level of violence. When they do, they leave behind signatures that don't look like war zones. Take the Gerald, Texas tornado of 1997. It was a slow-moving nightmare. It sat over the Double Creek estates, moving at a walking pace. The sand-blasting effect of the debris literally scoured the asphalt off the roads and pulverized everything in its path. It was a complete erasure. Then there was the Bridge Creek Moore tornado of 1999. This was the Speed King. A Doppler on wheels truck measured a wind gust of 301 miles per hour, the highest wind speed ever recorded on Earth. It threw SUVs half a mile and wrapped a pickup truck around a utility pole so tightly the front and rear bumpers touched. And we can't forget Joplin, Missouri in 2011. This was the costliest tornado in history. It was a grinder that grew to be a mile wide, taking 158 lives. The winds were so intense that they rotated the entire superstructure of St. John's Hospital 4 inches off its foundation and deformed the steel frame of the building. And how can we forget the destruction of Smithville, Mississippi in 2011? It is often called the most violent tornado ever recorded. It dug trench lines into the dirt and stripped the plumbing out of the ground. It was violence in its purest form. This is the lineage Enderlin has now joined. It doesn't matter that Enderlin hit a rural area while Joplin hit a city. The physics are the same. Whether it's scouring pavement in Texas, twisting a hospital in Missouri, or throwing a train in North Dakota, the signature of an EF5 is unmistakable. It is the moment where the atmosphere stops following the rules of nature and starts rewriting them. The Enderlin event forces us to ask a difficult question. Is the EF scale actually working? Remember, the EF scale is a damage scale, not a wind scale. It doesn't matter how fast the radar says the wind is blowing. If the tornado doesn't hit anything substantial, it can't be rated an EF5. This is the paradox that haunts meteorology. In 2013, the El Reno tornado was 2.6 miles wide with measured winds of nearly 300 miles per hour. It was a planet killer, but because it mostly churned up wheat fields, it was officially downgraded to an EF3. Conversely, if a weaker storm hits a densely populated area with poor construction, the devastation can look like an EF5, even if the winds weren't there. Enderlin was the rare exception. It was a ghost in the dark that happened to find the one object, a 30,000-pound train car, that could prove its power. If that train hadn't been there, if the tornado had shifted just 200 yards to the left, it likely would have remained an EF3 forever. It makes you wonder, how many other EF5s have we missed in the last 12 years, simply because they spun harmlessly over open dirt? How many monsters have walked past us in the dark unseen? For 12 years, we asked where the EF5s had gone. We debated the science, we questioned the surveyors, and we waited. Enderlin gave us the answer. They never left. They were just waiting for the right moment to remind us that the sky is not our friend. The drought is over, the scale has been reset, and now we just have to wait for the next one. What do you think? Should the EF scale be changed to include radar wind speeds, or should it stay based on damage? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the return of the monster, hit that like button and subscribe to Fatal Planet for more stories from the edge of extreme weather. Stay safe, keep your eyes on the sky, and we'll see you in the next one.